My ungrateful brother is suing my dad for $44,000, so I'm planning to accuse him of sexual abuse. I, 18F, have 3 half-siblings, 25F, 25F and 22M. They are all kids of a marriage my father had before meeting my mother and having me. I remember growing up with them, going on vacations, spending Christmas, celebrating birthdays, that sort of things. I grew up very close to them despite the age gap between them and me. That was until they grew up and started taking their mother's side on everything and just calling or visiting my dad whenever they needed money or something else from him. When I turned 11, we all went to spend the day at a house my grandfather, Mom's dad, has out of town. My grandparents, uncles, aunts, cousins, they all went with us. This house is about 2 hours away from my house, so we decided to drive there. I, of course, sat on the back seat of the car with my 3 siblings, and halfway there, I felt briefly a hand touch my butt. When I looked down, I saw my brother's hand close. He apologized and I told him not to worry, as I thought it had been an accident. That night, after all the celebration, it was time to arrange who was gonna sleep in which room. My 2 sisters of course decided to sleep in a room together, and my parents, my brother and I ended up sleeping in the biggest room of the house. There was a bed for 2 people and a sofa that turned into a bed, so my father decided that my mom and him were sleeping in the bed and my brother and me were sleeping in the sofa. It was fine by me. Around 1 a.m. I was woken up by a hand pulling my pants down and getting into my panties. I was so shocked I didn't even move. I didn't open my eyes and kept completely quiet. That night he just touched me for around 5 minutes and then went back to sleep because he knew my parents were in the same room. I couldn't go back to sleep that night, and, in the morning, around 6 a.m., as soon as I heard a noise that alerted me that someone was awake on the house, I rushed out of the room because I didn't want to be there anymore. It was my aunt who asked me why I was awake, so I just told her I couldn't sleep and stayed there talking to her. In the evening I begged my parents to let me go in a different car, and when they asked why, I just told them I wanted to talk to my cousins, so they let me. After that, I kept seeing my brother whenever he went to my house, which was very often, and most of the times, he found a reason for us to stay alone and get his hands into my panties. I would beg him to stop, but he would just cover my mouth, grab me tight in his arms and kept doing it. I never found the courage to tell anyone, not my parents, not my cousins, who are like my actual siblings, not my aunts, uncles, not anyone. Until a couple of years ago that I started having constant nightmare about this episode, so I decided that the best for me was to let it out of my system, and ended up telling my best friend, who was so supportive, listened to me, tried to understand and gave me many advices. A year forward and I'm in therapy telling my therapist everything I just wrote, and I'm still working on it with her. Now, to the main issue, my father is not the best father, but he's definitely not a bad father. He always made sure to pay child support, to give my sibling the best education he could, bought them clothes, took them on vacations with my mom and me many times, got my 2 sisters good jobs, bought them a car, helped them buy a house, gave them cell phones, talked to them daily, helped them when they got in trouble at school, etc. When my sisters and brother finished their degree and my sisters got a job, he wanted to stop giving child support, which is 30% of his salary. Now, I don't know how this works in other countries, but in Mexico, where I'm from, if you want to suspend child support, the person that's receiving it has to go to a sort of court to say that they, indeed, don't need it anymore. The problem started when my siblings said that they didn't want to go because they didn't want to get into trouble with their mother, as she keeps all of the money and spends it herself. So my dad had to formally ask them to go to court to say they didn't need the money anymore because my father is struggling financially lately and needs that 30% they are getting. So a person that works in court gave them an order for them to go to court and just sign a paper that said they agreed to give up the money they didn't need because they already have a job. Last Friday, my father received a call from his lawyer who told him that my siblings were suing him for $44,000 because, according to them, after the divorce, in 2003, my father signed a contract where he promised to give $50 each every month, and apparently my father never paid this. Also, my dad was unemployed for 6 months a couple of years ago and he couldn't pay child support during those 6 months. They said that, adding all of this money, my dad owes them 700,500 Mexican pesos, which is around $44,000. My dad called them and asked them if they really believe he owes them all this money, knowing everything he has done and everything he has given them, even though it wasn't his obligation to give them most of that: car, job, money to go out some nights, vacations, expensive clothes, etc. They answered yes, so he cut all kinds of contact with them. The thing is, that contract my father apparently signed is nowhere to be seen, nobody knows where it is, and my father is pretty sure he never signed anything of the sort. We are just waiting to see what is gonna happen and how my dad can get out of this, knowing that nobody can find this contract. Now I just think my siblings are so ungrateful and bad daughters and son in general, so I'm planning to finally tell my parents what my brother did to me for around 3 years and sue him. Maybe it's just the anger talking, but I really love my dad and I'm really pissed at my siblings for what they did. I'm terrified of even bringing the subject with my therapist because I feel so ashamed for never speaking up until 6 years after. Also, I don't know if my father is gonna believe me because I waited so much to speak about this. I really don't know what to do. I hated my parents when I was younger cause my autistic brother got basically everything. It took a life-altering event to change it. I have an autistic younger brother 28. He was diagnosed with autism at 3 years old. I didn't understand it at first, and I admit that I was somewhat mean to him. Partly cause he couldn't stop me, but also partly cause, isn't that what brothers do? Anyway, after he was diagnosed, all our lives changed. What used to be about finding common ground for everyone, turned into what's best for him. It didn't really hit until I was in the 3rd grade, for a couple reasons. Mainly cause I started to understand the way my life would be for the next almost 15 years, also partly cause that's when I started getting bullied, but that's a different story for a different day. From the 3rd grade, we started doing everything together, like I didn't get hardly anything that was about me unless it was a birthday meal. When I fully understood what was going on, I began to resent my parents. I would often sneak out and stay at my friend's house, lie to his grandpa about it being okay with my parents if I could stay there, just so I could get away. When I wasn't at home, my life was great. I got to play video games, run around and basically be a kid, which is what I wanted to do all along. When I returned home, I got yelled at, which I deserved for sneaking out, but it still hurt. Needless to say, I knew nothing would change until I moved out. Well, fast forward to about 4 years ago, after all that had been going on since I was about 9, my future wife and I bought our house. Nothing special, but it's a start. Even after we had bought the house, I was expected to stay at home and help care for my brother, even though my fiancée at the time was at our house by herself. Because I didn't have a backbone, I caved. And boy do I regret it. After a while, I got fed up. I packed all my bags, and left in the middle of the night without saying goodbye. I went to my house and slept in my house with my fiancée. The next morning, I woke up to over 20 missed calls and 30 to 40 text messages, and they all said the same thing: get your ass home now. I simply replied no. I'm 26 years old, and I am living with my fiancée. I told her what I told my parents, and she praised me for standing up for the right thing. From that point on, things got a lot better for me. We planned our wedding, got married, and yes, my parents and brother came. Then about a week after we got married, my mom told me I need to come out to the house, it's important. They lived about 35 to 40 minutes away, and I was tired, so I didn't want to drive that far. But she insisted I go, so I did. When I got there, they told me that they were getting a divorce. It hit me like a freight train. I didn't see it coming, but looking back now, I'm glad they did. They always fought. Usually about money. But then, things changed. My dad stayed in the house, and my mom moved closer with her family, about 2 hours away from my house. After they fully divorced, things changed for the better. My relationship with both my mom and dad improved significantly. No more screaming matches, no more near physical altercations, and we started getting along. I'm telling this story to tell you that although divorce seems like a bad thing at the beginning, with time, it could actually be a good thing.